Hi everyone. I'm going to be talking about heritage speakers, namely what a heritage speaker is and which class your heritage speakers should be in. So this is going to be a good course if you're a world language teacher that hasn't had much experience with heritage speakers, or if you're a counselor or administrator and want to get a little bit more information about where they should be placed. So my name is Kristen Montgomery, and I'm coming from a bit of a unique background. I've taught in public schools here in Wisconsin for about 6 years, mostly high school dual language immersion or Spanish language arts and Spanish as a world language, but I'm also certified in French and in ESL, and I've taught in a number of countries abroad at international and public and private schools. So it's been very interesting to see the uniqueness that heritage speakers and learners bring to our classrooms. So in this quick PD, we're going to go over 3 things. You're going to be able to talk about placement in classes and decide if the current class placement is appropriate for each heritage learner. You're going to understand the difference between a heritage learner, a native speaker, and a second language learner. And you're going to get some tips for advocating for them. So first, what is a heritage learner? And this is a definition that can be a little bit difficult. So when we talk about native speakers, that is not the same as a heritage learner. A native speaker is someone that is born and educated in a country that speaks, just put LX, so that could be any language. Let's say Spanish, because that's the most common in the United States. So they speak Spanish with their family. They were born and educated, let's say in Mexico, and they may or may not speak other languages. If they come to our school, a Spanish class is probably not going to be at all appropriate for them, depending on their level of education and their background. So normally, native speakers are not in our world language classes because they already speak the language. The exception to this might be like an exchange student. I know sometimes they'll put exchange students in a language class to kind of be a helper. That could be an okay situation depending on the teacher. I would certainly advise that you talk with the student and see what their goals are, and maybe they could get credit for being a teacher's assistant or something like that. Heritage speakers are a little bit different because they were actually born in a country, usually, that speaks language Y, or in this case, let's say they were born in the United States, but they speak language X, they speak Spanish with their family. So the language that they speak at home is different than the language of the country that they're living in, and they would be considered a heritage Spanish speaker then. A second language or a world language learner would be someone that was born and educated in a country that speaks, for example, English. They speak English with their families, and they're learning Spanish or any other language at school. So here's a quick video that I'm going to show you just a part of to help you understand that a heritage speaker can cover a really broad range of levels and abilities, experiences, identities. It's pretty complicated. Let me give you an example to put it into context. So let's say there's a guy named Juan. Juan's parents were born and raised in Mexico. They did most of their schooling there. They were native speakers of Spanish. But then when they were in their 20s, they moved to the United States, and they had Juan. Juan speaks Spanish at home, but he goes to school in English. He watches most of his TV shows in English. He speaks mostly English with his friends, and sometimes he doesn't want to speak Spanish. He would be considered a heritage speaker. Now let's say Juan gets married to another person who is a heritage speaker. They both speak Spanish, and they both speak English. But at home, they kind of prefer to speak in English. They speak about 20% of the time in Spanish. They have a daughter named Yasmin. Yasmin would also be considered a heritage language learner because she does speak some Spanish at home. There are heritage speakers of all different languages all around the world, usually in places that have large immigrant populations. For example, in Germany, there are large populations of heritage speakers of Turkish. Or in Switzerland, heritage speakers of Portuguese. Or in Israel, heritage speakers of Russian. We jump into even more of a gray area when we have multilingual countries like Canada, or countries like Singapore, where there are multiple national or official languages, but the schooling is done in another language. See that gray area I'm talking about? Okay, so now that you know what a heritage learner is, what unique characteristics do they have that we should be aware of for their learning? Well, one, they are bilingual. We know that people who are bilingual learn and think about languages in a different way than people that are monolingual. So we need to keep this in mind, and we need to know that they're going to be pulling from all of their linguistic resources when they're learning. I've put here, though, that their level of bilingualism could be very different. A balanced bilingual is someone that has equal levels of both of their languages. But if someone is only speaking Spanish 20 or 30% of the time and has done all their schooling English, likely their Spanish would be down here and their English would be up here. So they would not be a balanced bilingual. Identity is extremely important to heritage learners, just like it is to all of us, but language and culture is very much their identity. And they have often in the United States been marginalized, both in school systems and in some of the racist and xenophobic English-only policies that we've had here in the States. So number 3 is literacy. And heritage learners in general have lower levels of literacy than oracy or oral skills. So this is because they're used to speaking the language at home. They might even watch TV or do other activities in the language, but they're often not reading in that language because they haven't been to school in that language. And sometimes they have had formal classes. For example, weekend schools to learn Mandarin is quite common here, but in general, they're going to be much stronger readers in English. And number 4, many heritage learners suffer from low confidence in their heritage language. There is kind of this pressure to speak English and to speak English in order to succeed. And so often they are embarrassed to speak their heritage language, or they're told that they should focus on English, or they know that they're better at English and they know that they're not a balanced bilingual, and so they don't want to speak that. And they haven't had the same path as a world language student has. So there's what we call language shyness. So you may find that even though these are kids who have been listening to their parents speak to them in Spanish for 10 years, they actually don't want to speak Spanish, or they're embarrassed and don't want to do it in front of others. So if you are looking at your class rosters, and let's say you're teaching a French 1 class or French 2 class, and you realize that you have someone that has come from Senegal or France or Haiti, and you think, oh, okay, is this the best class for this student? And this is what we always need to ask ourselves when we have heritage speakers, because sometimes it is the best class, but sometimes it is definitely not the best class. So I want to encourage you to not make any assumptions at the beginning. Don't assume just because someone has a name that sounds Spanish or that sounds Russian that they will be a speaker of that language. So you should start with the home language data and look at their English language learner status. Do they actually speak that language at home? And yes, it's true that sometimes it's not reported. If the family doesn't report it, that's generally the only way that it's found out whether or not they speak another language at home. But usually that data will be correct. And then you'll find out, oh, okay, I should look further into this student because they speak Mandarin at home. Next, you should talk to the student in English and in the target language. Just kind of get a feel for how they are. So if you're speaking to them, let's say in Spanish, and they understand everything that you're saying, but they won't speak back to you in Spanish, that gives you a good clue about kind of their language shyness, their confidence, their understanding. You should also, of course, look at their nationality and know a little bit about where they're coming from. So if you have someone from Senegal or from Haiti, they may have some prior knowledge of French, but that may not actually be the language that they were schooled in. or it may be the language that they were schooled in, but they don't speak it at home, depending on the country and depending on their background. So in any case that you have someone who has learned some of the language, has that home data that says that they speak that language at home, or they've lived in a country where that language is commonly spoken or used in school, they should complete a placement test. And that placement test should definitely include reading and writing. So it should not just be like a multiple choice test. You want to see what they can do. Then, when they take the placement test, you should focus on what they can do. There will be errors, and you shouldn't look at the errors to try to see, oh, well, they didn't get this right, so they should start in Spanish 1. Okay? Look at what they actually can do and understand that they're not going to follow the same path as a world language learner will. So when you think you have more or less the right level, look at some other considerations. Class schedule often will be something where they will say, I'm sorry, under no circumstances can this student's schedule make them a student in French 2. It just won't happen. So then you have to decide, okay, is it better to do French 3 or is it better to do French 1? And unfortunately, that is our reality oftentimes as teachers, that the class schedule will dictate what class they end up in, even if it's not the best class for them. You should look to see if they have any special educational needs. You should look at their motivation. If they're telling you that they really want to learn Spanish and they promise they'll work hard, generally those students are not lying. Look at their grades. Look at any counselor recommendations. Look at any life events or social emotional needs of that student. Are they going to be distracted in class? Do they need an, quote, easy class? Would it be better if they had something where they could feel success and get some confidence? Or are they the type of student that needs a challenge? And I put relationship with teachers here too, for 2 reasons. One, that kind of goes along with social emotional. And 2, sometimes if you know that a certain teacher has more experience with heritage speakers and they might have the student in a lower level, but they'll be able to actually differentiate for them a little bit more than another teacher in a higher level, that could affect your decision also. So finally, after your students have been placed in what is their best fit class, it's also important to continue advocating for heritage speakers throughout the year. We have very siloed world language classes often, and the heritage speakers do not fit well into those silos because they're a very diverse group. Things that you can advocate for are world language professional development that is specific to heritage speakers and learners. You should also be advocating for a class for heritage learners, like a Spanish for heritage speakers class, if you have enough students, because this is something that they need, and in most places you're legally required to give them if you have enough students that would fall into that category. Obviously, it is much better for those students to be in a class that's going to be focusing on their specific needs than in a world language class where they have to start out with, hi, my name is. Communication with other world language teachers is very important, along with ELL teachers and counselors. The more you can get kind of a team attitude and make sure everyone is aware by doing things like sharing this video, you can do a better job of serving your heritage learners. Placement testing of all heritage learners, we've gone over why that's important, and focus on what they can do, not what they can't do. So if you have students that can use the conditional and the subjunctive in writing, but they can't use gustar correctly for Spanish, that doesn't mean that they need to start in level 1 just because gustar is often a level 1 skill. So focus on what they can do and think about kind of filling in those gaps as opposed to making them start all over again from the beginning, because they're not going to follow that same path. Your education as a world language teacher or a counselor and your advocacy matter. Gloria Anzaldúa said, I change myself, I change the world. We know that by learning what our heritage speakers need, we will be able to better serve them, and we will be better teachers and also help a population that has often been marginalized in the United States, and continue to advocate for language learning for all our students. Thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful. Bye-bye.